Act 10, which was a amazing piece of legislation, reform here in the state of Wisconsin, and really made history around the country, is now in peril as a result of a, shocker, Dane County judge. Joining me this morning to discuss this from our good friends at Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, Will Flanders. How are you?
Good morning. Doing all right. It's you were the first person I've heard talk about Act 10 in the past tense, and that was kind of jarring. But we'll bring some more doom and gloom to the gloomy weather this morning, unfortunately.
Right. And I mean, I'm all is not lost. This isn't, and I know the Democrats didn't anticipate that we were just going to say, "Oh, okay, no big deal." I mean, the good that it brought to the state of Wisconsin, taxpayers and municipalities. I mean, we have to remind people of that. We have to remind the citizens of Wisconsin about the benefits that it brought to everyone here.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So there's been a good deal of work over the years that's looked at, what has Act 10 meant for taxpayers, right? And there have been a number of looks at that. MacGyver has estimated the total savings at more than $16 billion is their most recent estimate. We've done some work recently where we talked to local government officials because we knew this case was coming. We talked to school district folks and folks in county executives. What would this mean if Act 10 came to an end? And they've told us this would be devastating. It's devastating for district budgets. We've talked to one school district leader in New Berlin, Wisconsin, who said a lot of the new programs and the innovative things they've done for college readiness and things of that nature over the last decade would not be possible if we were still funding education the way we did prior to Act 10, where school districts were essentially on the hook to whatever unions demanded every single year. We've talked to local government folks who tell us that, the way they've been able to be innovative in hiring, that they don't just have to pay people just based on how long they've been in a job. They can actually reward people who do a good job. Would be devastating for government efficiency to go back on that. So across the board, there's tons of negatives, both to taxpayers and to government efficiency and our ability to do a good job with our public schools.
Well, and I mean, honestly, it really is going to require, and it's unfortunate, but it has to be this way. It's going to require that Republicans, conservatives, I don't know if it's talk radio and other alternative forms of media, are going to need to refresh the memories of citizens here in Wisconsin so that, because I guess my question about all of this, Will, is that, nothing ever happens by accident. And why is it now? Why now in 2024, 14 or 13 years after it was signed into law by Governor Walker? Why now? Why didn't they bring it to a judge in 2011 and had a judge reverse it then?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? And the reality is that, a lot of these issues were litigated way back in 2010 or 2011 and 2012. It took a couple of years for Act 10 to be implemented statewide because districts like Madison continued to file lawsuit after lawsuit. So some of this stuff is relitigation, but the reality today is that with a change in the composition of the state Supreme Court on issues like Act 10, and we've discussed this in the past after the court race, and on issues like school choice, they're emboldened. They think this is their opportunity to reverse all of the good reforms that occurred under the Republican legislature and Governor Walker. And it seems like so far they're having a good deal of success in doing these things.
Well, and I think, Will, what's particularly concerning is that, I'm looking in our Wisconsin news to find out what's the reasoning behind this, and who stands to benefit from reversing Act 10 or ruling against certain components of Act 10. And of course, you can find all kinds of goodies in the Milwaukee Journal. I always say I scan the headlines so our listeners don't have to. You're welcome. But it's article after article. It's awfully curious how some of them are so in depth. It's almost as if they knew in advance of the decision by the judge. But one in particular that I saw that was just published in the last couple of days, of course, the headline says it all if you're just a headline reader. Act 10 overturned by Dane County judge. Walker-era law decimated public employee unions. And I saw another article today in the Milwaukee Journal about a DNR employee who's just over the moon, thrilled about Act 10 being reversed or being, I don't know what the term would be, struck down. And it's frustrating because we have to go against these mainstream media in Wisconsin that doesn't present both points of view.
Yeah, it's disappointing and unfortunately not surprising given the coverage we see on a lot of other topics. But there are folks of voting age right now that weren't even aware of Act 10. I've talked to folks. There a few years ago we go to a national event for think tank groups like us around the country, and everyone would be talking about Act 10, like how instrumental this was in the labor reforms that occurred nationally over the last decade. Now I sometimes have to remind people what this was and how important it was. And I think who hasn't forgotten are labor unions. They throughout Governor Walker's term, and I think still even today, they protest daily in the state capitol. Probably, maybe now they'll finally stop over Act 10. The labor unions didn't forget. The rest of us got kind of complacent. Despite the warnings of folks that if the composition of the state Supreme Court changed, we could lose all of these reforms. The reality is, that's what voters have chosen for the moment, and this is what we're dealing with. All of these reforms that were so important that labor unions disliked, public sector unions disliked, are now in jeopardy. And this is the biggest one, the biggest sort of thing they've tried to take on for the last decade. They finally have their opportunity for sure.
Well, and I mean, like dominoes, this is just only the beginning, which just reminds us all how critical this upcoming Supreme Court election here is in Wisconsin in 2025 in the spring, and how critical it is that because we anticipate, and I had a conversation yesterday with Scott Manley from WMC, and this will, and as I presume, and I have yet to have conversations with those in our legislature, but they will appeal this decision, and so it's going to be some back and forth, but eventually the decision will be made by the Wisconsin Supreme Court, correct?
You're absolutely right. Yeah, there's an appeals court in between, and there's the possibility that this will be sort of a lot. There'll be an effort to skip that court and go straight to the state Supreme Court. But in the end, this will be decided ultimately by the state Supreme Court. So that is correct. And
it's really so again how critical it is that we do everything we can to ensure that Brad Schimmel is elected to the state Supreme Court in April of 2025, which is frighteningly coming up quickly. And I mean, there's never any kind of rest for the weary. That's for sure when it comes to elections. Will.
No, and what we've seen, even in this last election cycle, is we saw, a victory for President Trump, but we saw a decrease in support down the ballot, and there's a fear that a lot of folks that turn out for President Trump don't necessarily turn out in some of these other races. So it really is important to tell folks, if you want the agenda that you voted for at the presidential level to not be hampered and destroyed at the state level, then you have to look carefully at some of these other elections and make sure that you're participating in those as well.
Well, and I look at who appointed this this particular Dane County judge to his to the circuit court. Guess who it was? Governor Tony Evers. And interestingly, and I mean, I'm surprised. This is Milwaukee Journal reporting on this, and this isn't the first person that they've reported on that has signed the petition to recall former Governor Scott Walker. Also, yesterday I talked about this. Supreme Court Justice here in Wisconsin, Janet Protasewicz, also signed the recall petition and participated in protests at the Capitol. So, I mean, that really should disqualify her from even weighing in on this on this particular case.
And even more specifically, she actually prejudged the case during the campaign on Act 10, if you recall that. She said that she does believe it's unconstitutional. So there are arguments out there that she should certainly be recusing herself in this instance, that she's already judged it without looking at the facts.
Well, and I guess I'm looking at a quote from your very own Rick Essenberg from Will, General Counsel and President, and he states Act 10 was upheld in multiple cases. Today's decision is based on reasoning that was rejected by the federal courts years ago. Why is it, Will, and it's hard for me to say Will when you work for Will, but I'll do my best. I don't want to confuse you with Ned Flanders, but I mean, why is it that it doesn't ever seem as if any law is settled law? And why is it that we have to now relitigate this after it's already been decided by a higher court than this Dane County Circuit Court?
Yeah, this is the phenomenon of liberal judges, right? It's what we see from this level, with a local, with a court to the Supreme Court when we get liberals on the Supreme Court. Precedent doesn't matter because they see judges as implementers of policy in the same way that the legislature is. And so precedent doesn't matter if it stands in the way of the liberal agenda. And so despite what we decided a decade ago, now that there's a chance, now that they see this opportunity, it may as well not have happened. The precedents may as well not exist. And again, that's a phenomenon we see on many different areas with liberal judges.
I mean, is it really, plausible to state that they're going to ignore the cost savings to local governments and school districts throughout the state of Wisconsin? I mean, aren't those who were positively impacted by Act 10? I certainly hope that they stand in unity with what we are saying and are defending it, because, I mean, if we do not have, I don't know, a full court press, a public relations campaign to really equip the voting electorate in this upcoming spring election, we're going to see all kinds of, the precedent that will be set is that every single law that we saw that has benefited the taxpayers here in Wisconsin will be overturned by the state Supreme Court.
I suspect behind the scenes that there might be sort of more discussions with liberal allies than they might expect that are opposing this. So we talked about the work we did with school districts and local governments. We had some more conservative-leaning folks that spoke to us, but there are folks off the record in more liberal areas of the state that also agree that losing Act 10 would be devastating. School districts that are constantly going to referendum with the excuse that they don't have enough revenue. Well, guess what? They're going to have a lot less revenue to deal with once collective bargaining comes back. So I think that there may be momentum because this is going to be sort of decided. I mean, I'm not going to say it's decided in a political way, but because the precedents are already out there, to move away from it almost requires that this be more of a political decision. And, the impetus is on folks to show these justices that the political implications of this will be devastating, and the consequences for even their allies, even liberal school districts like Milwaukee, Madison, liberal areas of the state will be devastating and unaffordable.
I mean, has it always been the case, Will, that the unions, and I don't even know which way to go with this, but how the unions have been in the pockets of the Democrat Party, or the Democrats have been in the pockets of the unions? I mean, has it been that way since the beginning of unions? Is that this I don't know, unholy, unhealthy relationship?
Certainly when it comes to public sector unions, I think that's the case. And I think we ought to differentiate public sector unions and private unions here to some extent. But when it comes to public sector unions, what do? They protect government workers. They protect the bureaucracy. And guess what? That aligns very well with the interests of the Democratic Party that want to grow government, see government do more in your life, take more control of individuals' lives. If you're the party that's for bureaucracy and for government control, well, then you want to protect government workers from having to be efficient or do their job in a good way. And so there was a natural alignment there going back to the progressive era. And yes, it does continue up to today, absolutely.
Oh, well, this is some glum news on a glum day outdoors anyway. Well, Will Flanders, thanks for joining me this morning. I appreciate the conversation. Look forward to our next one. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Have a great day as well.
Take care.